In a quiet little town surrounded by rolling hills and endless fields, there lived a woman named Elena. She wasn't extraordinary in the way people often think of heroes, with flashy clothes or grand gestures, but she had a heart full of kindness and dreams bigger than her small world. Elena was pregnant, carrying her first child, and every day she imagined what life would be like when her baby arrived. She pictured laughter filling their home, warm meals on the table, and a future where love reigned supreme. But life rarely goes as planned, especially for someone like Elena, whose circumstances were far from ideal. Her husband, who should have been her rock during this time, had become distant and cold. Once upon a time, he'd promised to stand by her side through thick and thin, but now it felt like those promises were just empty words carried away by the wind. He worked long hours at odd jobs, coming home late at night with tired eyes and an even wearier spirit. The weight of their financial struggles seemed to crush him bit by bit, turning him into someone Elena barely recognized anymore. One evening, as Elena stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup, she overheard voices outside. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe he was talking to a neighbor about borrowing tools or discussing some work-related matter. But then she caught snippets of the conversation that made her blood run cold. Words like debt, money, and auction floated through the thin walls of their modest home. Her hands froze mid-stir, the wooden spoon clattering against the edge of the pot. Curiosity tugged at her, so she tiptoed closer to the door, trying not to make a sound. Through the crack, she saw her husband standing under the dim light of the porch, his face shadowy and unreadable. Across from him stood a stranger, a man dressed in expensive-looking clothes, his posture confident yet menacing. They weren't shouting, but the intensity of their whispers was enough to send chills down Elena's spine. "Are you sure about this?" the stranger asked, his tone smooth but laced with greed. "It's unusual." "I don't have a choice," her husband replied, his voice flat and resigned. "You know how much I owe. If I don't pay soon, they'll come after us." After her. Elena's breath hitched. What were they talking about? Who were they? And why did it feel like her entire body was screaming at her to run? The stranger tilted his head, studying her husband like he was inspecting livestock. "Fine," he said finally. "But remember, if she causes trouble, it's on you." Her husband nodded stiffly, avoiding the man's gaze. When the stranger left, disappearing into the darkness, Elena stumbled back inside, her legs trembling. Beneath her. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she sat at the table, staring blankly at the steaming pot of soup, her mind racing with questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. That night, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the sheets, kept her wide awake. She lay there, clutching her swollen belly protectively, wondering what tomorrow would bring. By morning, she still hadn't pieced together the puzzle of what she'd overheard, but one thing was certain: something terrible was looming on the horizon. When her husband woke up, he avoided looking at her, his movements hurried and mechanical. He muttered something about running errands and disappeared out the door before she could say a word. Alone in the house, Elena tried to distract herself with chores, but her thoughts kept circling back to the mysterious conversation. What debt was he talking about? Why had that man mentioned an auction? And most importantly, what role did she play in all of this? Hours passed, and as dusk fell, her husband returned, not alone but accompanied by two rough-looking men. Their presence sent alarm bells ringing in Elena's head. One of them grabbed her arm roughly, ignoring her protests, while the other shoved a sack over her head. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled against their grip, but it was no use. She was dragged out of the house, her cries muffled by the fabric covering her face. They loaded her into a carriage, the jarring motion making her stomach churn. Through the suffocating darkness, she could hear muffled voices exchanging terse instructions. Fear clawed at her chest, threatening to overwhelm her completely. Where were they taking her? What did they plan to do with her and her unborn child? After what felt like an eternity, the carriage came to a stop. The sack was yanked off her head, and Elena blinked against the harsh light of lanterns hanging from the rafters of a large barn. Dozens of faces turned toward her, their expressions curious and calculating. Some wore masks. Others didn't bother hiding their identities. The air smelled of hay and sweat, mingled with the faint tang of desperation. Her husband stepped forward, his face pale and drawn. For a moment their eyes met, and Elena searched for any trace of the man she once loved. But all she saw was shame and determination. He cleared his throat and began speaking, his voice hollow and detached. "This is my wife," he announced, gesturing vaguely in her direction. "She's 8 months along, healthy, obedient, perfect for whatever needs you might have." The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. Obedient? Healthy? Was that all she was to him now? A commodity to be sold off like cattle? Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her break. As the bidding started, Elena felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: anger, betrayal, helplessness. Each offer thrown her way felt like another layer of dignity, stripped away. Yet amidst the chaos, a tiny spark of defiance flickered within her. No matter what happened tonight, she vowed to fight for herself, for her baby, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. Little did she know, fate had one last surprise in store, a twist that would change everything forever. The barn was dimly lit, the flickering lanterns casting eerie shadows on the wooden walls. Elena stood in the center of it all, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her shawl. The room buzzed with low murmurs and occasional bursts of laughter, but none of it reached her ears. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart, each beat reminding her of how trapped she felt. Her husband, no, that man, had stepped aside now, leaving her exposed to the hungry eyes of strangers who treated her like an object rather than a person. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a raspy voice, banged his gavel against a makeshift podium. "All right, gentlemen," he called out, his tone almost cheerful, as if this were just another ordinary transaction. "We've got something special here tonight. A young woman, healthy, strong, and carrying a child. Rare find these days." Elena flinched at the words. Rare? Special? She wasn't some prize to be won or sold. She was a human being with dreams, fears, and a life growing inside her. But no one seemed to care about that. To them, she was just another item up for grabs, her worth measured in coins and convenience. Bids started flying around the room, each number slicing through the air like a knife. Some men bid casually, their voices bored, while others leaned forward eagerly, their eyes gleaming with interest. One particularly unsettling bidder, a burly man with a thick beard, kept nodding at her, his lips curling into what might have been meant as a smile but looked more like a sneer. Every time someone raised the price, Elena felt her stomach drop further. Would it never end? Her gaze darted around the room, searching for any sign of escape, but there was none. 2 men stood near the door, their arms crossed, blocking any chance of fleeing. Even if she tried to run, where would she go? She didn't know this place, and she certainly couldn't outrun anyone in her condition. Defeat weighed heavily on her shoulders, making it hard to stand tall. Still, she refused to cry. Tears wouldn't help her now. They'd only give these people more ammunition to mock her. As the bidding continued, Elena noticed something odd. Amidst the sea of eager faces, one figure stood out. Cloaked in dark fabric, they lingered near the back of the barn, partially hidden in shadow. Unlike the others, this person didn't shout out numbers or crane their neck to get a better look at her. Instead, they observed silently, their posture calm yet commanding. Something about them made Elena uneasy, not in a threatening way, but in a way that suggested they weren't like the rest of the crowd. Finally, after what felt like hours, the bids began to slow down. The burly man with the beard had taken the lead, his deep voice booming confidently as he offered a sum that silenced most of the other bidders. "Looks like we've got a winner," the auctioneer said, raising his gavel. But before he could bring it down, a soft, clear voice rang out from the back of the room. "Double that amount." Every head turned toward the cloaked figure, who now stepped forward slightly. There was a collective gasp, followed by murmurs of surprise. No one had expected such a bold move, especially not so late in the game. The auctioneer blinked, clearly taken aback, then quickly recovered. "Do we have confirmation?" he asked, looking at the burly man. For a moment, the bearded man hesitated, his jaw tightening. He glanced between the cloaked figure and Elena, weighing his options. Finally, with a grunt of frustration, he shook his head and backed off. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the mysterious bidder. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, slamming his gavel down with finality. The sound echoed in Elena's ears, sending a fresh wave of dread coursing through her veins. Sold. To whom? What kind of fate awaited her now? The cloaked figure moved closer, revealing themselves slowly. When they finally pulled back their hood, Elena caught her breath. It was a woman, older than her, with sharp features softened by kindness in her eyes. She exuded authority, the kind that demanded respect without needing to ask for it. Around her neck hung a delicate silver chain, and her clothes, though simple, spoke of wealth and refinement. "You're coming with me," the woman said firmly, her voice steady and reassuring. There was no malice in her tone, no hint of cruelty, just determination. Elena hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. After everything she'd been through that night, it was hard to believe anyone could genuinely want to help her. Yet, there was something about the woman's presence that calmed her racing thoughts. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or perhaps it was the warmth in her gaze. Whatever it was, Elena found herself nodding weakly, too exhausted to resist. "Chio." Woman gestured for her to follow, and together they walked toward the exit. As they passed her husband, Elena stole a glance at him. He avoided her eyes, his expression unreadable. Was he relieved? Guilty? Angry? She couldn't tell, and honestly, she didn't care anymore. Letting out a shaky breath, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, determined to leave that nightmare behind. Outside, a luxurious carriage waited, its polished wood gleaming under the moonlight. A driver stood beside it, holding the door open. The woman helped Elena climb. Inside, her touch gentle but firm. Once seated, Elena sank into the plush cushions, overwhelmed by the contrast between this opulent vehicle and the grimy barn she'd just escaped. The ride was quiet, save for the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves against the dirt road. Elena stared out the window, watching the blurry shapes of trees pass by. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax, even if only slightly. The tension in her body eased, and her breathing slowed. She didn't know where she was going or what lay ahead, but for now she was safe, or at least safer than she had been. After a while, the woman broke the silence. "My name is Victoria," she said softly, meeting Elena's gaze. "And I'm here to help you." Elena blinked, startled by the unexpected kindness in her voice. "Help me?" she echoed, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" Victoria smiled faintly, though there was sadness in her eyes. "Because no one should have to endure what you've been through. Not tonight, not ever." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to say thank you, to express how grateful she was, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, clutching her belly protectively. Whatever Victoria's reasons were, Elena decided to trust her, for now. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, but in that moment, it was all she had left. As the carriage rolled on, carrying her farther away from the horrors of the auction, Elena allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where she wasn't defined by fear or betrayal. One where she and her baby could start over, free from the chains of her past. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to keep her going, for now. The carriage ride felt like a dream. A strange, surreal escape from the nightmare Elena had just endured. Outside, the world blurred past in dark streaks of trees and shadowy fields, but inside the air was warm and calm. The soft creak of the Wheels and the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves created a soothing rhythm that lulled Elena into a fragile sense of safety. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, though her hands still trembled as they rested on her belly. Victoria sat across from her, her posture relaxed yet commanding. She didn't push for conversation, instead letting Elena sit in silence, giving her space to process everything that had happened. But after a while, Victoria leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and kind. "You're safe now," she said, softly, her voice cutting through the quiet like a gentle breeze. "No one will hurt you again, not while I'm here." Elena looked up, meeting Victoria's eyes. There was something about the way she spoke, firm but compassionate, that made Elena believe her. It wasn't just empty reassurance, it was a promise. Still, trust didn't come easily after what she'd been through. Her husband's betrayal, the auction, the cold stares of strangers, all of it lingered in her mind like a storm cloud refusing to pass. "Why are you doing this?" Elena finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question had been circling in her head since they left the barn, but she hadn't dared to say it out loud until now. "You don't even know me." Victoria smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. "Because I've seen too many women like you suffer needlessly," she replied. "Women who are treated as if their worth is tied to someone else's greed or convenience. I couldn't stand by and let that happen tonight, not when I had the means to stop it." Elena blinked back tears, her throat tightening. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such understanding and conviction. Most people would have turned away, unwilling to get involved in someone else's mess. But not Victoria. She had stepped in without hesitation, risking her own comfort to save a stranger. As the carriage continued its journey, Victoria began to share more about herself. She explained that she came from a wealthy family, but had always been troubled by the injustices she saw in the world. Over the years, she dedicated her life to helping those in need, especially women trapped in abusive situations or forced into circumstances beyond their control. She ran shelters, funded education programs, and worked tirelessly to give others a second chance at life. "I've spent years building networks of people who can help," Victoria said, her tone matter of fact. "Doctors, lawyers, teachers, they're all part of a larger effort to make sure no one has to face these kinds of horrors alone. And tonight, my network led me to you." Elena listened intently, her heart swelling with gratitude but also tinged with disbelief. How could someone care so much about a person they'd never met? In her experience, kindness often came with strings attached or worse, ulterior motives. Yet, there was no trace of manipulation in Victoria's words. Everything she said felt genuine, as if helping Elena was simply the right thing to do. Eventually, the carriage pulled up to a grand estate surrounded by lush gardens and towering oak trees. The house itself was breathtaking, with wide windows glowing warmly in the night. As they stepped out of the carriage, Elena hesitated, feeling out of place amidst such luxury. This wasn't her world. She belonged in small cottages and modest kitchens, not sprawling mansions filled with fine furniture and priceless art. But Victoria seemed unfazed by Elena's discomfort. "This is my home," she said simply, guiding her toward the front door. "And for however long you need it, it's yours too." Inside, the house was even more beautiful than it appeared from the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and rich fabrics adorned every surface. Despite its elegance, the atmosphere was inviting, almost cozy. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the room. Servants moved quietly in the background, their presence unobtrusive but reassuring. Victoria led Elena to a cozy, sitting area where a tray of tea and snacks awaited them. "Eat something," she urged gently. "You must be exhausted." Elena nodded, realizing how hungry she actually was. She hadn't eaten properly in days, too consumed by worry and fear to think about food. Now the sight of fresh bread and fruit made her mouth water. She nibbled cautiously at first, then gave in to her hunger, savoring each bite. As she ate, Victoria explained what would happen next. "We'll take care of everything," she assured Elena. Medical care, legal support, whatever you need. You won't have to go back to him, not unless you choose to. And even then, we'll make sure you're protected. Elena shook her head firmly at the mention of returning to her husband. I won't, she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. He sold me. He didn't care about me or our baby. How could I ever trust him again? Victoria nodded, her expression understanding. That's completely understandable. Healing takes time, and forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, not after what you've been through. Right now, your focus should be on yourself and your child. Everything else can wait. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. What would it be like to wake up each day knowing she was safe? To raise her baby in a home filled with love and stability? These thoughts brought both hope and uncertainty. Could she really start over? Or was she too broken to begin anew? Over the next few days, Victoria kept her promises. Doctors arrived to check on Elena's health, ensuring both mother and baby were thriving despite the stress they'd endured. Lawyers drafted papers to sever ties with her husband, protecting her from any further harm. Meanwhile, Victoria introduced Elena to other women who had once faced similar struggles. Hearing their stories gave her courage, showing her that survival and healing was possible. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Victoria placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. You're stronger than you realize, she said softly. And you're not alone. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. For the first time in a long time, she believed she might actually have a chance at happiness, and for now that was enough. The days that followed Elena's arrival at Victoria's estate passed in a blur of activity and quiet reflection. Each morning she woke up to sunlight streaming through the large windows of her room, a stark contrast to the dim, oppressive spaces she had known before. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt a flicker of peace. But it wasn't just the luxurious surroundings or the kindness of her host that made her feel this way. It was the realization that she wasn't alone anymore. Someone believed in her. Someone cared enough to fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Victoria kept her word about handling everything. Lawyers visited regularly, explaining their plans to ensure Elena's safety and independence. They spoke about restraining orders, property rights, and custody arrangements for her unborn child, all terms that sounded foreign but carried the weight of freedom. The man who had betrayed her would no longer have any claim over her life, or her baby's future. The thought brought both relief and anger. How could he have done this to her? To them? Despite the progress being made, Elena still wrestled with conflicting emotions. There were moments when she felt strong enough to face whatever came next, but there were also nights when fear crept back in, whispering doubts into her mind. Would people judge her for leaving him? Could she really raise a child on her own? What if he found her again? These questions haunted her, but every time they surfaced, Victoria was there to remind her that she didn't have to face them alone. One afternoon, as Elena sat in the garden sipping tea, Victoria approached her with a determined look on her face. It's time, she said simply, pulling up a chair beside her. Time for what? Elena asked, her brow furrowing. To deal with him, Victoria replied firmly. He can't get away with what he did, not without consequences. Elena froze, her cup halfway to her lips. She hadn't thought much about him since arriving here. Her focus had been on healing and preparing for the birth of her child. But now, the reality of his actions came rushing back. He had sold her, at an auction like she was nothing more than a piece of property. Even thinking about it made her stomach churn. I don't want to see him again, she admitted softly, setting the cup down. I want to forget he ever existed. Victoria nodded, her expression softening. I understand, and you won't have to see him directly. But justice needs to be served, for your sake and for others like you. If we let him walk away scot-free, he'll only hurt someone else. Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted nothing more than to move on and never look back. But another part, a stronger, angrier part, knew Victoria was right. Justice mattered. Closure mattered. She couldn't erase what had happened, but she could make sure it counted for something. Over the next few days, Victoria orchestrated a plan that showcased not only her wealth and influence, but also her deep commitment to fighting injustice. Through her network of informants and connections within law enforcement, she uncovered evidence of the illegal auction where Elena had been sold. Photos, documents, witness testimonies, it all pointed back to her husband and the dangerous men he owed money to. With this information, Victoria worked tirelessly to build a case strong enough to bring him down. Meanwhile, Elena prepared herself emotionally for what was coming. Victoria encouraged her to write down her thoughts and feelings, suggesting it might help her process everything. At first, Elena resisted. Writing seemed pointless. How could words capture the depth of her pain? But one evening, sitting by the fireplace with pen and paper in hand, she decided to try. Slowly, haltingly, sentences began to form on the page. Words like betrayal, fear, and hope spilled out, each one unlocking a little more of the heaviness inside her. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. Finally, the day arrived when justice would be served. Elena didn't attend the trial herself. Victoria insisted it wasn't necessary. Instead, she stayed behind at the estate, pacing nervously as she waited for news. Hours ticked by, each minute stretching endlessly. When Victoria returned late in the evening, her face was grim but satisfied. "It's done," she announced, sinking into a chair across from Elena. "He's been arrested, not just for selling you, but for his involvement in organizing those auctions. Turns out he wasn't the only one profiting off human suffering." Elena stared at her, stunned. Arrested? Organizing auctions? She had known he was desperate, but she never imagined he'd stoop so low. The revelation left her reeling, but mixed with her shock was a strange sense of vindication. He wouldn't hurt anyone else. Not like this. As word spread through the small town, whispers reached Elena's ears. Neighbors who had once pitied her plight now condemned her husband's actions. Some expressed guilt for not seeing the signs sooner, while others simply shook their heads in disgust. His arrest became public knowledge, exposing the ugliness hidden beneath the surface of their quiet community. For Elena, it was bittersweet. She didn't revel in his downfall, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing the truth was finally out. With the immediate threat neutralized, Elena turned her attention to the future. Victoria continued to support her, helping her navigate the legal system and secure financial independence. Together, they planned for the arrival of her baby, transforming one of the guest rooms into a nursery filled with soft blankets, colorful toys, and a crib painted a cheerful shade of blue. Every detail reminded Elena of how far she'd come and how much she had to look forward to. But rebuilding her life wasn't just about practical preparations. It was also about rediscovering who she was outside of the role she'd played for so long. With Victoria's encouragement, Elena began volunteering at a local shelter for women in similar situations. Sharing her story with others gave her strength, reminding her that she wasn't defined by her past. She met women who inspired her with their resilience, and in turn, she inspired them with her courage. One day, as she stood in the shelter's kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, she realized something profound. She was happy, not perfectly, completely happy. That would take time, but genuinely content in a way she hadn't been in years. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time she believed she could handle whatever challenges came her way. That night, as she lay in bed rubbing her swollen belly, she whispered softly to her unborn child. "You're going to grow up in a world full of love," she promised, "and no matter what happens, we'll face it together." For the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change for Elena. Life at Victoria's estate became a sanctuary, a place where she could heal, grow, and prepare for the arrival of her baby. Each day brought new routines, new challenges, and new discoveries about herself. For the first time in years, she felt like she was truly living instead of merely surviving. Victoria continued to be a pillar of support, guiding her through every step of her journey. She introduced Elena to doctors who specialized in prenatal care, ensuring both mother and child were healthy and thriving. They scheduled regular checkups, and with each visit, Elena marveled at the tiny life growing inside her. The doctor would press the cold ultrasound wand against her belly, pointing out the fluttering heartbeat on the screen. Every time she saw that flickering image, her heart swelled with love and hope. This baby wasn't just a reminder of what she'd endured. It was proof that she could overcome anything. As her due date approached, Elena threw herself into preparing for motherhood. With Victoria's help, she transformed the guest room into a cozy nursery. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and shelves lined with books and stuffed animals gave the space a cheerful warmth. A rocking chair sat in the corner, waiting for those late-night feedings when sleep seemed like a distant memory. It was a far cry from the cramped, dingy spaces she had known before, and every detail filled her with gratitude. For Victoria, for the second chance she'd been given, and for the strength she had found within herself. But healing wasn't just about practical preparations. It was also about rediscovering who she was outside of the roles she had played for so long: wife, victim, survivor. At Victoria's suggestion, Elena began volunteering at a shelter for women escaping abusive situations. At first, she hesitated. How could she possibly help others when she still carried so much pain herself? But Victoria reassured her that sharing her story might inspire someone else to find their own path to freedom. Her first day at the shelter was nerve-wracking. She walked in clutching a tray of homemade cookies, unsure of how to introduce herself or what to say. The women sitting around the table looked up at her with wary eyes, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Some clutched their children close, while others stared blankly at the floor. Elena recognized that look. It was the same one she had worn not too long ago. "I'm Elena," she said softly, setting the tray down. I used to be in your shoes. My husband, he betrayed me. He sold me thinking I was worthless. But I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. You are stronger than you think." For a moment, no one spoke. Then one woman, a young girl barely older than Elena herself, spoke up. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elena took a deep breath. "He got caught, arrested. Justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone he hurt." She paused, looking around the room. "It wasn't easy. There were days when I thought I couldn't keep going, but I did. And if I can do it, so can you." Her words sparked something in the group. Slowly, the women began opening up, sharing bits and pieces of their stories. One talked about fleeing with nothing but the clothes on her back. Another described hiding in a neighbor's basement for weeks until she could reach safety. As they spoke, Elena realized how powerful it was to connect with people who understood her pain. These women weren't strangers. They were kindred spirits, bound together by shared struggles and dreams of a better future. Over time, Elena became an integral part of the shelter. She helped organize workshops, taught basic skills like cooking and budgeting, and even started a support group for expectant mothers. Watching these women rebuild their lives inspired her in ways she hadn't expected. Their courage reminded her of her own and pushed her to keep moving forward, even on days when doubt crept in. Amidst all the work, Elena noticed subtle changes in herself. She laughed more often now, finding joy in small moments. A sunrise streaming through the window, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen, the way her baby kicked whenever she pressed her hand against her belly. She also started dreaming, again, not just about survival, but about possibility. What did she want her life to look like after the baby was born? Where did she see herself 5 years from now? One evening, as she sat in the garden sipping tea with Victoria, she voiced these thoughts aloud. "I want to do more," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone. Not just for me, but for others. I've seen what happens when people don't have anyone to turn to. I don't ever want another woman to feel as lost as I did. Victoria smiled, clearly pleased. That's wonderful, she said. You're already making such a difference. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper resources and training. The idea planted itself in Elena's mind, growing roots deeper than she anticipated. Over the next few weeks, she and Victoria brainstormed ways to expand her impact. Together, they came up with a plan. Elena would establish her own safe haven, a place specifically designed to support pregnant women and new mothers escaping abuse. It would offer housing, medical care, counseling, and job training, giving women the tools they needed to start over. Excited by the prospect, Elena threw herself into the project. Victoria provided funding and connections while Elena handled the details, designing layouts, interviewing staff, and securing permits. It was hard work, but every challenge only fueled her determination. She wanted this place to be perfect, a beacon of hope for women who had none. As the months passed, Elena's body began showing signs of nearing labor. Her back ached constantly, and her feet swelled to twice their normal size. Still, she refused to slow down. If anything, the impending birth motivated her even more. She imagined holding her baby for the first time, introducing him to the world she was building, a world full of kindness, opportunity, and love. Finally, the big day arrived. Elena woke up in the middle of the night, her stomach tightening with contractions. Panic bubbled up briefly, but she quickly reminded herself that she was ready. Victoria drove her to the hospital, staying by her side throughout the long hours of labor. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny, squalling bundle, with 10 perfect fingers and toes, Elena burst into tears. Not tears of pain, but of overwhelming joy and relief. He's beautiful, Victoria whispered, handing him to Elena wrapped in a soft blanket. Elena gazed down at her son, her heart overflowing. Welcome to the world, little one, she murmured, kissing his forehead. We've got a lot of work to do. In the weeks that followed, Elena adjusted to the demands of motherhood. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes tested her patience, but every smile from her baby made it worth it. Meanwhile, construction on her safe haven continued, bringing her closer to realizing her dream. She named the facility New Beginnings, a nod to her own journey and the fresh start she hoped to offer others. One afternoon, as she rocked her baby to sleep, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the darkness of betrayal and despair to the light of purpose and hope, her transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. She knew challenges lay ahead, motherhood wouldn't be easy, and running a shelter would require sacrifices, but she faced them with confidence. For the first time in her life, she felt unstoppable, and as she watched her baby drift off to sleep, she whispered softly, "We did it. We're going to be okay." For the first time, she truly believed it. Years passed, and Elena's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The baby she had once feared bringing into such a harsh world grew into a curious, joyful little boy. She named him Samuel, a name that carried strength and hope, and poured all her love into raising him. Every laugh he shared, every step he took felt like a victory not just for her but for the woman she used to be. The frightened, broken version of herself who had doubted whether she deserved happiness. Samuel didn't know much about his father or the circumstances of his birth, but Elena made sure he understood one thing. He was deeply loved. Through bedtime stories, warm hugs, and quiet moments spent watching the sunset together, she instilled in him values of kindness, resilience, and courage. "You're strong," she would tell him as they played in the garden, "and you can do anything if you believe in yourself." It wasn't just advice for him, it was a reminder to herself too. Meanwhile, New Beginnings flourished under Elena's care. What started as a small shelter quickly became a thriving community center, offering resources and support to women from all walks of life. Pregnant mothers found refuge there, learning skills to build independent lives while preparing for parenthood. Counseling sessions helped them heal emotional wounds, and workshops taught practical trades like sewing, cooking, and even basic carpentry. Elena worked tirelessly alongside her team, ensuring every woman who walked through the doors felt seen, heard, and valued. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers wrote articles about her work, calling her a beacon of hope in their town. People began volunteering their time and donating supplies, inspired by her determination to make a difference. Even some of the women she had helped returned after getting back on their feet, eager to give back to the place that had saved them. Together, they created a network of support, a sisterhood bound by shared struggles and triumphs. But Elena's journey wasn't without its challenges. Some nights when Samuel was asleep and the house was quiet, memories of her past crept back, and she'd think about the man who had sold her, the fear she'd felt during those dark days, and wonder how anyone could treat another human being so cruelly. Those thoughts often left her restless, pacing the floor until dawn broke. Yet each morning brought new opportunities to focus on the present, to celebrate the progress she and others had made. One day, as she stood in the kitchen making breakfast, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a man standing there holding a bouquet of wildflowers. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. For a moment, Elena tensed, unsure of what to expect. But then he spoke, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I heard about your work here. I'm a doctor. Daniel is my name. And I thought maybe I could help." Elena studied him carefully. There was something sincere in his expression, something trustworthy. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular visitor at New Beginnings, offering free medical checkups to the women and children staying there. His presence brought a calm energy to the space, and soon everyone warmed up to him, including Elena. At first, their interactions were purely professional. They talked about logistics, patient care, and funding needs. But over time, their conversations expanded beyond work. Daniel shared stories about his own life, how he had grown up in a household where helping others was considered the highest calling. Elena listened intently, finding comfort in his words. In turn, she opened up about her own experiences, not all at once but gradually, trusting him with pieces of her story. Their bond deepened in ways neither of them anticipated. Daniel admired Elena's strength and dedication, while she appreciated his compassion and unwavering support. Slowly, they began spending more time together outside of New Beginnings, walking through the gardens, having dinner in town, laughing over silly jokes. It wasn't romance at first sight, but something deeper and more meaningful, a connection built on mutual respect and understanding. For Elena, letting someone into her life again wasn't easy. Trust didn't come naturally after everything she'd been through. But Daniel gave her no reason to doubt him. He respected her boundaries, celebrated her victories, and stood by her during moments of doubt. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, he turned to her and said, "You've done so much for others. Don't forget to let someone take care of you too." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for the second chance she'd been given, for the family she had built, and for the possibility of love finding its way back into her life. As years went by, Samuel grew into a bright, compassionate child, shaped by the values Elena and Daniel instilled in him. Together, the three of them formed a family unlike any other, one forged not out of obligation but out of choice and love. Elena continued running New Beginnings, expanding its reach to neighboring towns and inspiring countless others to join her cause. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience, proving that even in the darkest moments light can break through. The man who had betrayed her remained locked away, forgotten by most. Occasionally, Elena wondered what he thought about during his long days behind bars. Did he regret his actions? Did he realize the magnitude of what he had lost? She hoped he did, but she refused to let his mistakes define her anymore. Instead, she focused on building a legacy of hope and healing, ensuring no one else would suffer the way she once had. On Samuel's 8th birthday, Elena gathered everyone at New Beginnings for a celebration. Women, children, volunteers, and friends filled the courtyard, laughter echoing off the walls. As she watched her son blow out the candles on his cake, surrounded by people who loved him, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was her life now. Not perfect, but beautiful in its imperfections. Later that night, as she tucked Samuel into bed, he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mama," he asked, "why do you help so many people?" Elena smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over," she replied softly. "Just like we did." And as she kissed him goodnight, she knew she had finally found the happiness she had once only dreamed of. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. From betrayal to redemption, despair to hope, Elena had proven that, even in the face of unimaginable pain, the human spirit could rise above it all and create something truly extraordinary.